Due Process, winner of 25 regional Emmy Awards. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers University, Newark, and Rutgers Law School in Newark.
I did 7 years in Norway. Thought I was going home, and the day I was scheduled to go home, they were like, well, you can't leave. They are targeting you for civil commitment.
He maxed out, sentence served, but the state deemed Rodney Roberts too dangerous to release. It would take 10 more years before a DNA test finally cleared him.
From that moment on, my life has been, I tell everybody I'm living the Viva Loca right now. It's been a celebration. Everything's a celebration to me because I know what it feels like to suffer. I know what it feels like to be deprived and not have and, be feeling powerless.
Civil commitment for those thought to be sexual predators. More than 400 in New Jersey locked up right now. That's this edition of Due Process. It's a kind of imprisonment reserved for just one type of offender. It has no set sentence and no guarantee of release. And right now, here in New Jersey, there are 484 detainees who already served their time, still locked up, because the state deems them too dangerous to release. It's called civil commitment, and the state says it's a treatment program, but the residents call it prison. And Rodney Roberts, for 10 years, was one of them. If you were with us last week, you saw Rodney's story. A guilty plea born of fear, a maxed-out sentence of 7 years, and on the day of release, not a ride home, but a surprise transfer to civil commitment. He would be held there as an incorrigible, violent sex offender for a full decade, although it would later be proven that he had been innocent from the start. He's here today in the moot courtroom at Rutgers Law School to talk about those 10 years, and he's joined by Professor Jenny Brooke Condon, director of Seton Hall Law School's Equal Justice Clinic, which sued the state on behalf of the hundreds locked up indefinitely in civil commitment. So, Rodney, let me begin with you. You are out,
Yes.
but you had a horrendous 17 years, and my guess is that the last 10 were worse than the first 7?
Yes, they were. I mean, 'cause the last 10 were worse mainly because of the indefinite determination, a lifetime of being civilly committed.
The first 7 you knew, even if you didn't get paroled, which you did not,
Right.
that you would get out in 7 years.
Exactly.
But you didn't.
I didn't. On the day that I was scheduled to be released, I was actually told that I was being transferred to what's now known as the Special Treatment Unit, and that a petition had been filed by the New Jersey Attorney General Office to seek my civil commitment under the Sexual Violent Predator Act. I didn't understand what that was and what that really meant, but all I knew was...
And let me just add, what you had entered a plea to was kidnapping.
Right.
Even though you hadn't done any of it.
Right.
But you entered a plea to kidnapping because, as you said to us last week, you were afraid that you would be in prison for the rest of your life if you tried to go to trial.
Yes.
So it's only kidnapping, it's not sexual assault, and yet the state said, you're a sexually violent predator, you stay.
Well, under civil commitment, the Attorney General is allowed to even use dismissed offenses as if they were convictions. And that's where the problem is at. When they use these dismissed offenses, there's no way to litigate against an offense that has never been brought to any fruition through the court system. There's no record there. You can use it to help litigate your case because the offense has been dismissed. But for medical terms, I would say psychiatric and psychological terms, they will use these dismissed offenses as if convictions to determine a pattern
And earlier offenses, and you had had an earlier offense,
Right.
which you say, in fact, you were not guilty of, but were, in fact, convicted of.
Right.
You served 7 years.
Right, yes, exactly.
So that
And-
was the first 7 years you served, the stains on your record.
Right.
Then you enter a plea to half of the charges, but the other half still get considered, and you wind up in civil commitment.
Right. And
For
also-
10 more years.
10 more years. And the thing about civil commitment is that they have to prove what's called your current mental status. This can't be based on just your past mental state of mind. You have to show a current inability to show signs of control.
Had you shown that?
And never had I shown that. And even during the time there, I had not shown that.
But you didn't show remorse, which is what they were looking for.
Exactly. I was
Because
unable
once
to
you
show-
even went to prison,
Right.
you said, I am not guilty.
Exactly. I explained to the attorney, hey, this thing is getting out of hand here. I thought that by accepting this plea that I was saving my life, and they were telling me, oh, you had the 7 years, but you will only do 2 years. You'll be home shortly. I wound up serving a complete 7 years. Parole denied me multiple times, 3 times.
Because, again,
I
you didn't show remorse.
refused- Exactly, and they were saying, hey, here you are, and our for the parole board saying to us that you didn't commit the crime, that you pled guilty to a crime you didn't commit, and they literally looked at me as if, this guy, he's just like everyone else.
Of course, Jenny Brooke, it's not unusual for people to plead guilty when they're innocent.
Of course, and in fact, our criminal justice system, unfortunately, puts a lot of coercion
Relies on it.
It does, and it puts a lot of pressure on, in particular, poor individuals who cannot afford legal counsel and who are languishing in often overcrowded jails and poor conditions, who will take a plea in order to move on to a conviction and speed through the process of returning through their families. And so there's a lot of bad choices available to innocent individuals, and that taking a plea may actually seem the least worst option. And it results for innocent people like Mr. Roberts, in the case of civil commitment, not only the injustice in the criminal justice system, but then the process is exacerbated in civil commitment, where some of those very same problems in the criminal justice system are now serving to keep an individual indefinitely detained.
And exacerbated because of that word, indefinitely.
Absolutely.
Very different, isn't it?
It is. There's no protections of the criminal justice system. There are some protections. There is a judge that is required under the statute to evaluate whether a person should be recommitted on an annual basis.
Is it the judge who really does that, or is it a psychologist or psychiatrist who works for the state and makes a recommendation?
Well, Mr. Roberts was describing the process
yeah.
to me earlier. There is a judge there is a
Yeah.
process, but there is certainly a lot of deference that is given to the state.
Right.
And people like Mr. Roberts have a very uphill battle in trying
Right.
to convince both their treatment providers and the judge that they have progressed in treatment and are ready to be released.
You get to talk to the judge?
You don't get to talk to the judge personally. You have to talk through your public advocate. You are at this point deemed incapable of functioning. That's why even your Sixth Amendment right to represent yourself was tested and stripped in the beginning process. But one of the disparities that they have with the civil commitment process is this. The public advocate office only has really access to psychologists, when the Attorney General office has access to psychiatrists who specialize in disease of the mind, and which is what the Sexual Violence Predator Act dictates, that there's some disease of the mind. So the judge constantly gives preference to the psychiatrist who writes the diagnosis, the axis, whatever axis are, and the individual is continuing to have civil commitment. And the psychiatrist—
You see the psychiatrist?
You see the psychiatrist, but it's like seeing basically a hitman for the Attorney General's office. He's going to write what the Attorney General wants him to write. He's going to say and testify to what the Attorney General wants him to say and testify to, no matter how progressive you are in treatment, no matter how sustainable the changes you've made over the period of time. They're going to continue to write exactly what the Attorney
You
General
denied
said.
treatment
Right.
because you said, I'm not a sexually violent predator.
Right.
That didn't help you.
Well, It wasn't, I denied treatment only in part to the degree that they couldn't particularly do a treatment protocol on me because of my position, being innocent, and because in order to fully invest in treatment, one of the criteria is that you have to admit guilt and you have to take some accountability.
You weren't going to do that.
And I wasn't going to do that. And because of that, that set me at odds with the treatment team itself. Not all the treatment team felt adamantly against it, but they had to do their job.
You're a smart guy. Weren't you tempted after years of being in there to just say, yeah, you know what, I did it, and my heart breaks over what I did. It was a terrible, terrible thing. What can I do to make it better?
Well, when you're feeling in a position of hopelessness, as it puts you in, because you're sitting there year after year not knowing when you're going to ever get out, so many things go through your mind that you want to remedy yourself and get your life back. But for myself, I felt that I had betrayed myself so much by even pleading guilty to a crime I ain't commit. So even earlier on, while I was serving the 7 years, I had to deal with the torment of feeling as if I betrayed myself, I let myself down. So I had made the decision I was never going to put myself back in that boat again and have that feeling of powerlessness, even for myself. So I made the decision that I was going to stand strong, and no matter what the course and the consequences are, I was going to stay on the truth and let the chips fall where they may with it.
You know, Jenny Brooke, this program is called Due Process. Due process in civil commitment, does it exist?
There are some minimal procedural protections, as I mentioned, the judge, and there are some states like Minnesota where it's a much more dismal scheme. There is no judge, or there wasn't before.
And there was
a
no
lawsuit
treatment.
was filed. There was no treatment, and no one ever got out. And so, as problematic as the process is that Mr. Roberts
Well, not many
is
get out in New Jersey either, right?
That's right.
Of 716, we were told by the state, who have been committed, how many have actually gotten out?
It's 159, I believe. It's a small number, and that is one of the concerns of our office and our lawsuit. But I think it should be just mentioned that the judges who serve in these cases do sometimes, over the objection of the treatment providers, recommend a resident for discharge.
But didn't get it right in Rodney's case.
That's certainly true, and Mr. Roberts' case really demonstrates the paradox for an innocent person who's in civil commitment, because not only do you have to accept guilt, you also have to process your supposed crimes in treatment.
So you have to actually make up
in front of other residents in group treatment.
an imaginary
modules.
scenario.
And that is, I imagine, a traumatic thing for an innocent person to do, beyond just the initial trauma of accepting a guilty plea.
So your clinic brought suit.
Yes.
But not to say, do away with civil commitment, this is not good, because?
Well, in 1997, the Supreme Court in Kansas versus Hendricks upheld the idea that civil commitment was constitutional because supposedly it is a scheme that's not motivated by punishment. The idea here is to protect the public and to provide treatment to individuals that meet the criteria for civil commitment.
Was it punishment?
It's 100% punishment. I mean, here you have a facility that's ran and operated by the Department of Correction, which is a paramilitary organization, how they run, and then along in conjunction with the Department of Human Service. But the Department of Human Service plays a secondary role in this. And not only that, but even the structure, the building in which civil commitment is being held, it was once the lockup unit for Rawway, the Red Top, the administrative segregation unit. So the building and way it's designed is physiologically constructed for punishment.
You've been there.
Yes. It's a prison, no doubt about it. Students and I at the Center for Social Justice go and meet with our clients there. And it's staffed by guards, it's behind barbed wire fence,
Yeah.
It's a segregated unit. It looks like what people would consider where the housing units, solitary confinement, some of the cells where individuals are held there. There is treatment provided at the STU that, partly because of some of the changes brought about by our lawsuit, does address some of the needs of residents there. But does it achieve the purpose of rehabilitation. I think the numbers might speak for itself. There are far too many people who have spent more time in the SDU, like some of the class representatives in our case, in civil commitment than they served on their underlying criminal offenses. And
well, one of the people that you had, that you were representing in your suit, one of the named plaintiffs, Derek Sessoms.
yes,
He was a teenager.
that's right.
I think he only had the one case.
That's right.
Right.
I was 16. I was a juvenile.
Which he admitted to.
Yes.
I should have never came here. I'm still fighting for my freedom to this day.
He's an incorrigible, sexually violent predator. How do you determine that?
Well, I think this also shows the ways in which efforts at criminal justice reform and a lot of the bipartisan thinking that is going on in that area really needs to extend to civil commitment, because the U.S. Supreme Court has focused on the developments in brain science and recognized that 15-year-olds, their brains are not fully developed, and it's hard for any medical provider to say that this person is indefinitely a threat to society. And yet that's what happened in Mr. Sessom's case. After he served his time, he's now almost served the same amount of time in civil commitment for an offense that he committed when he was 15 years old, and dealing with a lot of other issues like addiction in his life. I think our criminal justice system is premised upon the idea of rehabilitation as one of its goals, and yet in civil commitment, though in name that is it is a treatment module, that really gets lost in the equation, because we see people just languish there for an inordinate amount of time beyond the period of their criminal crime.
We now at least are talking in this society, or have been. We hope it will continue going forward when there is not so much interest from Washington. But we're looking at things like mass incarceration. We're looking at drug policy and a failed war on drugs. We're not looking at civil commitment. One of the things that I found so interesting is, at least a dozen people asked me, "What are you working on?" And when I told them I was working on this show, and this was the same thing that happened when I first went and interviewed Derek, "What is that? What? You mean they keep it? What? No, they can't do that."
Right.
That's the reaction.
I get a lot of that when I tell a story and people really don't know what civil commitment is.
It seems impossible.
But I wanted to backtrack a little bit about the juvenile defenders, because you have Derek Sessom, but you have a number of residents who also fall in that criteria, who are juveniles. And what happens is, according to the civil commitment and the law surrounding it, the static 99, which is the tool they use to determine their statistics of who's going to fall into what category and commit a crime within what future time, was never designed to monitor juveniles. It was only designed to calculate adults. So there was no real way to factor in the juvenile defendants. So while they were there and they had these one offenses, they basically sat. Like you have individuals like Terry Newby, who was a juvenile as well, and there was so many. The list goes on. Maybe 10, maybe 15, and they sit there with no possibility of being released when their whole life taken from them without the opportunity to be released as an adult.
And is that something? How much of any of this can be challenged?
Well, I think what we need is really smart and courageous legislatures that are willing to rethink the system.
Remember what we're talking about. We're talking about sexually violent predators. Where did Megan's Law come from?
Right.
Where did the registry come from? I mean, it was all a reaction to really terrible, terrible crimes.
Absolutely.
But a reaction that sent us, I think, in an unfortunate direction in too many cases.
Right. Even legislatively, the name itself, sexually violent predator, is an inaccurate description of what treatment is and who's held there. Now, although I was there 10 years and it was a horrible 10 years, I am not one who doesn't say that there's not a need for some deterrence, because it's real. The danger is real. I mean, being out here in society, seeing how the world is today, the danger is very real. So there's a need to protect the most vulnerable members of society. That's not going to go. However, the treatment process, the screening process is flawed. When you have an individual that you know doesn't fit the criteria, that you cast this wide net, now you fishing for tuna, but yet you get whales, you get sharks, as opposed to putting these individuals back out of society, you continue to hold them and force them as if you're taking a circle and you're making it to fit into a square. And because of that, you have this large population that people who, in essence, don't fit this criteria. You don't have people there. I've been there 10 years. Now, you have people out here that I would have come to see are worse than some of the individuals there. But you don't have people there that are so maniacal or so out of control that there's, if the code go off, which is the code where DOC responds, that there's an altercation, if the code goes so far in between that, you know, you'd be like, wow, something happened, because it's not a violent environment. You know,
So you're saying people should want to protect themselves.
Right.
We can all agree on that.
Right.
But is this the effective means?
Right.
And one of the things that this is supposed to work for is putting the worst of the worst.
Right.
That's right. And so I think we need to take a look at it. We need to take a look at the fact that New Jersey has one of the 4 highest populations of civilly committed sex offenders in the nation, and look at whether or not it's actually delivering on its promise, or whether the cost for innocent individuals like Mr. Roberts and other individuals that really could have a second chance at life and live safely in society are actually getting that chance through civil commitment.
So you can't do that through the courts. Isn't it unrealistic to expect that legislators who have to get elected, who know this is a very emotional subject, are going to say, you know what, let's do away with civil commitment?
Well, I think it's a tall order. I definitely think that. But as we are looking at criminal justice reform and thinking about the ways in which so many of the problems, the use of eyewitness identification, which was a problem in your case,
Right.
Mr. Roberts, the role of race in policing and charging decisions and sentencing, the way in which...
And class, I would
as
guess
well.
that that's also an issue, class and race.
It is, because
At
the
Avenel.
larger population, if you look at the population, is
With a minute
African-American
left to go.
population. And, you know, it's a subject that the society can never become desensitized about, because it's such a sensitive topic. So that's never going to go away. But one thing that the state of New Jersey did, they sold the bill, the legislation so tough that these are the worst of the worst. The ones that are going to kill you and do everything. So now to come back to the same society and say, oh, they're not so bad, that is what the problem is at, because they oversold the dangerousness that they claim exists in civil
So
commitment.
the hope is, we're about to run out of time, but the hope is that a case like Rodney's maybe brings someone to the position of saying, well, maybe this is not working. Maybe this is not fair.
And the ways in which those same problems are carried over into civil commitment. And just to add, I think there is a role for legal challenges like the ones that my office brought that are really important. We can expose the injustice. We can hold the STU to its promise to provide the treatment it agreed
But
to
the
provide.
bottom line injustice you can't get to.
Well, there's a system in place that allows for an indefinite detention. And until we do something about that more broadly, many of these same problems are going to persist.
Indeed. With my thanks to Rodney Roberts and Jenny Brooke Condon, that is this edition of Due Process, but the problems posed by flaws in the justice system, underscored by cases like Rodney's, are at the heart of what we do here on Due Process. So we hope you'll join us next week and every week. Till then, for producer Tanya Bentley and all of us here, I'm Sandra King. Thanks for watching.
What happened was the state took the Rawley's ADSEG, which is a lockup unit, the administrative segregation unit, and emptied it out of all the prisoners, and then reconfigured it to fit, in their mind, to house those that have civilly committed the Sexual Violence Predator Act. Now remember, this building is created for punishment, so there was no way physiologically to undo the aspect of confinement and restriction.
You couldn't get out.
You couldn't get out. You lock in the same processes in prison is the same processes in civil commitment. The visit program, the food program, the counts, the Department of Correction, the same rules and regulations. But the only thing that is different is in the penal system, you have an opportunity to challenge if you receive an infraction. You can go to what's called the court line procedure where the evidence is laid out what you did. In civil commitment, it's just you did it. You're going to be put in what they call MAP, Modified Activity Programs, and you're going to stay locked in this unit until the psychology or Department of Human Service Department deem you.
Maybe for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch us on demand on YouTube.